Could you tell me a little bit about your experience with this new style of pedagogy?
Okay. It's called Reacting to the Past, and it's developed at Barnard College in New York City. The person who's been most important in developing it is Mark Carnes. He doesn't like to say that he invented it, but basically it happened in his class from the original idea. And what reacting does is takes a particular historical situation, and there are multiple games that we could talk about if you wanted to in a little while, but it takes a historical situation and it places the student in that situation. And so, for example, the American Revolution. There's a game about who will control New York City, loyalists or patriots, in 1775, 1776. And any good reacting game, virtually all of them have this sort of model where there's people who are in favor of a particular issue, people who are opposed to it, and then a large group of people who are undecided and need to be persuaded by argumentation by either the first or the second groups. Will they not support a particular
So you
issue?
divide them into groups?
So the class is divided into groups, and depending on the nature of the game, there could be 3 groups, there could be more than 3 groups. All the students receive a particular role, a character role, so they become an individual, they become a person in the game, and this is game playing pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find particularly appealing about reacting is that it really puts the student in charge of the learning. If we stick with the example of the American Revolution again, the students will read as a basis for their argumentation lots of material that you would assign anyhow in the class. So, for example, Tom Paine's Common Sense, or the Declaration, or other things of that nature. For example, if I say, okay, now we're going to talk about common sense in the next class period, there'll be grumbling and moaning and general overall unhappiness, perhaps, about having to read that. But in the context of the game, they pore over common sense to find an argument. They pore over all the primary and secondary material to find an argument, because there's that sense of, in a way, competitiveness.
They have to perform, I guess.
They have to perform as well, too. And so you have to, for example, stand up and make an argument on a particular issue in support or in opposition to a particular issue or event that's happening.
Do any kids ever get spooked by having to be put on the spot?
Sure. I mean, it's natural, particularly if they've not done a game before. It is a frightening thing. But it's a thing that many schools are attempting to teach, period. If you take a speech class or something else, there's the recognition in most institutions, I think, that you need to stand up and be able to talk in front of a group of people. And one of the nice things about reacting is that it's not necessarily really you. It may be your character in 1776. So a lot of students who are concerned about that, I have this conversation with them and say, well, just pretend that it's not you, that it's not 2012, and you know, it's 1775. It's May here. You're meeting in the New York legislature, and go with that. And that seems to work. And clearly, you're going to find people who dislike the pedagogy. I mean, I'll have to admit that when I was in their shoes as a student, I may have been one of them. But I think the pluses outweigh any of the minuses like that. And
Do you, it seems like there'd be fun ways to even talk to students about anachronisms, like certain arguments that they couldn't have made
right
at the time because it maybe wouldn't have been an
but
option.
if they use a source-based argument, then you kind of avoid anachronisms, yet at the same time anachronisms happen. Another game that I use quite a bit is The Trial of Anne Hutchinson in Puritan, Massachusetts. And the essential question there is, should she stay or should she go? Will she be banished from the colony or not? And roughly half the time, and I'll do three of these games a semester in 3 different classes, she'll be able to stay.
Oh.
Which is counterfactual.
Yeah.
And then into each reacting game is a class period built with what they call the post-mortem, where you tell the students, okay folks, this is what happened in your class, but not what happened in reality, and then we can talk about
Yeah.
Why did it happen that way? What arguments did you use? Was everything done the way you could have? The other side, the losing side, could you have made better arguments that would have persuaded the undecided people to go with banishment instead of staying?
I like how the idea of it teaching about contingency in
Mhm.
history.
Yeah,
That these factors have to come together, and nothing is inevitable.
exactly. And that's one of the chief strengths of reacting. I mean, but for the side of the bed that somebody got up on that day, perhaps something happened or didn't happen, and we tend to view our history as set in stone, and of course it happened like that, and it happened like that for a reason, perhaps. And what reacting really opens the eyes of students is exactly what you said, is that they simply, it just happened that way because that's the way it worked out that day. Another thing that appeals to me about reacting as well is as I kind of indicated earlier, the engagement or buy-in on the part of the students. I have had students tell me that they were sitting up 12:30 last night in their dorm room trying to work together as a team to figure out how to beat the other side. And I've never had anyone tell me that in a regular seminar setting. We were up till 10:30, 12:30 last night talking about common sense in our dorm room. Never happened.
Huh.
So the engagement and the self-learning, in a very real way, the teacher steps back in a reacting game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to think of myself as more of a referee than anything else. Running around and talking to the different groups kind of under my breath, or perhaps passing a note saying,
Yeah.
have you considered this, or is that argument they're making really valid? Can you counter it in any way? So you're sort of very much on the fringes, and you don't allow, you can't allow yourself to interfere. The number one thing that will squash a game is the teacher stepping in and saying, no. You have to kind of learn to let them make a mistake. You can correct that afterwards, but hopefully what happens is that the other side realizes that the first side is incorrect and has read something wrong or interpreted something incorrectly, and that they then go ahead and call them on that. So, and it has a wonderful way of doing that.
So you've done it in your role as a Fulbright here.
Mm-hmm.
Have you done some of those exercises in the Norwegian University classroom?
We're working on it. At the end of this, in approximately a month, we will be running, there's a game that deals with the civil rights issues in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. And we'll be allotting a portion of a class to play about a third of that game. And that will happen, as I said, right after Easter break. I'm also putting together a seminar for faculty members here at University of Agder to go ahead and make a day-long seminar of it, so that the teachers kind of get a sense for it. Because in a very real way, reacting doesn't make any sense until you do it. I didn't really get it either until I did it the first time. And fortunately, Barnard College, they've been very active, and there are several seminars a year around the country that you can attend. In early June, they have a massive, from Wednesday to Sunday, seminar where you really dive deep in, and you can stay at the dorms at Columbia University for a nominal cost, and essentially it becomes reacting boot camp then.
Is Gilder Lehrman or any of those groups associated with it, or are there funds coming from somewhere for
I
it?
am not really aware of the funding. I know that the funding is always something that they're looking for and looking for support, but to be honest, I haven't really looked into the funding end of things so very much. So.
And if you had to, in the end, if you had to summarize like a few of the basic things that it teaches, you said something about it a little bit already, but some of the skills that you would want to be forward, that history teaches there in these games, what would you say those were?
Reacting does a lot of things, and I don't want to make it sound like the end-all and be-all. It's not the answer to absolutely everything, but it does bring in an awful lot of skills that not only historians use, but other departments as well, too, in philosophy and religion, and even in science. There's a game called The Trial of Galileo that science ethics classes have used. But what does it do? In a nutshell, reacting has a way of making students engage the literature in a way that they don't do in a normal class. it fosters their critical thinking skills in a way that I don't see in a normal class, because they themselves are buying in and digging into the material. There's also a written component of the game, because we all know when we make oral presentations and oral arguments, particularly if there's a lot of back and forth, that you miss what you wanted to say, or you misspeak or something of that nature. But students also write usually 2 papers on the arguments that they make, and that then I tell them is their opportunity for perfection. You know, you've marshaled all your evidence, you've written it well, it's in English and it's in correct English and it's cited as it should be. So you have that added effect of a written and an oral argument on the same page. And I guess finally it develops a sense of camaraderie in the classroom. For example, just to end with the idea of the American Revolution game again, if I play that at the beginning of the semester, and you know, it takes a couple 3 weeks to do, you have the rest of the 12-week semester left. I find that reading seminars for upper level students go much more easily. You know, they've gotten to know each other, they've bonded in a way that they wouldn't have normally, and not only are they much more comfortable talking to one another in a seminar, which for me makes a discussion go quite nicely, they remember the material. You know, we brought up Tom Paine's Common Sense there back in September. Now we're talking about it in the larger context of the revolution, and it's there. They remember it. They're not kind of scratching their heads. So it's active learning at its best, I think. Again, it's not the answer to everything, but it is amazing what it does do.
Well, thank you for your time.
Sure.